Welcome to our Harmonius podcast series. My name is Michael Francis Lott, and I am here with author Peter Wells, who is the author of the book Notes from the West Pole. And today we're going to be diving into his piece called Evolutionary Event.
There's an evolutionary event occurring, and it's within each one of us. We are returning to our source, allowing the inner truth to be refreshed with a new understanding. Our understanding of what this life is about is not fixed by teachings, laws, or money. The outside powers of God and the ruler that divide us and enslave us with rewards and punishments can move over now. Now we awaken to find the ruling authority is running amok and the person is enslaved to a conflicted way of life. The new understanding requires neither dominance nor submission. The new understanding is to fulfill the life being lived without harming others. Each of us can do this. Each soul wakes up and sees a purpose to fulfill the life being lived. An ancient truth can now be brought forth from within. The oneness of our condition, as self, as society, as planet, is apparent to the human intelligence.
So one of the things that I really appreciate about this work is that there's kind of multiple levels happening here. We're talking about this whole collective movement that's happening, but also an individual movement, an individual evolutionary event. And one of the things you say in this piece is that the soul wakes up and sees a purpose. And I'm just curious for you in your own personal life, when your soul woke up, what was the purpose that it saw?
Well, the same purpose as is mentioned in this, that I had to fulfill my life. And I had to be truthful and honest about that fulfillment. That the culture, the whole society, was in a state that was not possible, actually, to follow. And so the real quest was to find something that worked. The work involved exploring my own inner being. And in my case, I went on what I called an inner journey. And in that inward journey, I kind of cleared away the debris of my early life and woke up to what is. And that isness is the only thing that we have available. In other words, we're awake and alive in a situation that has been going on for centuries, many millennia, and we've inherited all this stuff. But waking up now, we can look at it afresh. And looking at it afresh, it's not a question of being dominated. It's not a question of submitting. It's a question of fulfilling this amazing energy that we possess.
And as you went through this process yourself and you woke up to this realization, my life is to be fulfilled. Now what? Now what did you do?
Well, the next thing I did was I realized quite clearly that the social order was totally messed up, that we needed a more harmonious way of life, that the understanding that we were always going to be at war and that human beings were naturally in conflict. Well, in the past, we've come that route, but we weren't always that way. We were farmers, agrarian, and we lived quietly for hundreds and hundreds of years, maybe thousands. But now we've inherited a warrior situation all around the world. We've got people killing people everywhere. And I don't like that. Mm-hmm. It doesn't make sense that we would do that we spend our energy that way, when, in fact, this whole magical experience is really to be celebrated.
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing that I'm curious about hearing from you, because I'm 28, 29, and you're 82, and we're kind of different places in life. And so, from my perspective, you're kind of like a trailblazer in how you've created your life and going on that path of fulfilling yourself. And, I've gone through my own spiritual realizations and have come to very similar things that you have, but you've actually gone through the process of creating that life. So I'm curious for you in your personal life, how did that look to fulfill yourself, to fulfill your soul?
Well, I had to follow what I knew from within me rather than belonging or adapting to a culture or a way of life that is not working. Mm-hmm. So we had to begin again. I think many people did that in the 60s and 70s, coming to a kind of dead end in the culture. We had no choice but to leave it, to tune in, drop out. What was it? That it was tune in, turn on, and drop out. Right. And we had to do that. That was the opening to a new way of life, in fact. Rather than following what has been and not enjoying it, much more sensible was to find out what can work. Of course, that's not easy. The things that I knew were that it's possible to live by agreement, and it's possible to be here and collaborate and cooperate and make things work without dividing us into opposites, without dividing us into us and them, for example. How can we all be here and function in a whole way? Now, it doesn't mean that I expect to relate to everybody in the world, but it does mean that I can think and relate to this experience of life as a wholeness without dividing it.
That's so beautiful. And my interpretation of what you're saying is that even though we live in a culture, in a society where there's a lot of differences and there's a lot of focus put upon those differences, there's still this place in every single relationship that we're in where we can find a means of connection. We can find common ground in every relationship. And so I think in building our life, really looking out at our relationships, okay, where can we connect? Where can we collaborate? Where can we achieve a mutual benefit is kind of how to apply those in our world. So that's kind of what I hear you saying.
Right. Well, we're in a crisis. It's not a thing that goes on forever. We're in a crisis now that is going to resolve. And even though that crisis is economic and it's national, nevertheless, we're on a planet, and it's the whole experience of being human that we're dealing with. And the human being, the human family, does not want war. That is not a benefit, nor do we want our everything to be resolved by conflict, whether it's argument or debate about for and against, us and them. We can actually absorb our own life, recognize in our own life that we're free and we can live the way we want to live. However, that sounds ridiculous, I'm sure, to a lot of people, because we're under this governmental power that insists that in our absolute obedience. And there's no alternative to that. It's compulsory. However, our real condition is happening within us. And the adoption of the belief system, for example, is optional. We don't actually have to do it. Of course, we might be put in a mental institution, but the real center of this life is within us. And so long as we believe that the power is over us and outside of us, and we're compelled to be obedient to it, then we're thwarting our own inner power. And our inner power is the one that's really living this life. And if we want to be fulfilled, and I believe we all want to be fulfilled, we have to honor what's going on inside us.
Yeah. And I'm just wondering, how do we make that shift in ourselves? Because it's very difficult for a lot of people to not put their focus on what people think or on other people's perspectives, or to not be punished by, authorities and so forth. I mean, there's a lot of self monitoring that people do on a daily basis to be conscious of how other people perceive them, for instance. So how do we take some of that energy out from that self-monitoring, and bring it to empower ourselves or to nourish ourselves?
Well, I think we have to realize we're already empowered. And we've obscured that power by the so-called powers that be, that are saying we must be obedient, we must do this. Our parents have grown up that way, and therefore the children are taught that. We're in a situation where the way of life has gone in a direction that is almost untenable for the individual person. If you go into the army or into something where you're working with a lot of people under a command, under an authority that is telling you what to do, that's relatively simple, but it doesn't fulfill the life being lived. What that does is it fulfills another code, another authority. Fulfilling the life being lived is an evolutionary event that we are coming to, and that is our freedom. When we know that, the fulfillment of the life doesn't mean anything against anybody else. It just means the fulfillment of the energy that we are, whether it could be artistic, it's very difficult to be a corporate person and be obedient, of course, to the corporate requirements and still fulfill the life being lived. The life being lived doesn't really deeply care about the corporation, but you have to fake it in order to perhaps earn your living through the corporation. So it's very confusing right now. We're not in a clear place. I'm suggesting that there is an artist in each of us, and that artist can contribute their own particular version of the world and of this life and be fulfilled. Because they have stayed within their personal power. They haven't left their personal power, neglected their personal power.
So are you saying, if I'm hearing this correctly, that the path to self-empowerment is to kind of take responsibility for ourselves to be an artist, or to revive this inner artist and to allow our inner expression to be brought forth? Is that kind of what you're saying is the clearest path to doing that?
Yeah, it is much clearer than belonging to a society that says its rules and requirements are more important than the person. You know, it's like, do we do purely what we're told to do? Or do we actually discover within ourselves something that is living this life and that has its own perspective?
So with all of this being said, because a lot of your teachings and your writings have to do with dealing with external authorities and empowering ourselves from within. So I've got to ask, when you were a kid, were you rebellious?
Yes. But I was rebellious within a certain, I wasn't rebellious against anyone. I was rebellious about the truth and about what made sense. And so I did get beaten a lot.
Who beat you?
Oh, well, the powers that be, the masters.
Who are the masters in your life growing
the
up?
masters then wore mortarboards and gowns and walked around this 400-year-old school as though they were in charge of every kid, every student. And I couldn't quite accept that. And so even though, the wonderful thing is that at that time, of course, I was disappointed in myself because I wasn't really fulfilling the needs of this school, and I wasn't shining as far as my parents were concerned. So there was an element to this where I didn't feel necessarily good. But later in life, I realized that my path was purely correct for myself.
Interesting. So when you were in that place of going to school and getting beaten, did you felt kind of like inadequate in some way because you weren't fitting into what they were expecting of you?
Yeah, right. I was taught that I was inadequate. That was the teaching.
And you bought into it when you were younger to some extent?
I was beaten, with canes on my backside by teachers who had just come back from the war, the Second World War, and they were filled with all kinds of torment. And luckily, they had me to take it out.
Took it out on you?
Because they were expecting, they needed me to be completely obedient to what they said. But I was questioning that. I didn't exactly rebel. I just didn't, if I didn't believe it, I didn't go for it.
Yeah. Man, I feel like there's a lot of kids right now that are going through that exact same thing.
Absolutely.
I mean, for myself, when I was in school, I didn't necessarily rebel, but I would shut down and just like be the person in the back of the class that just fell asleep and got bad grades.
Right.
And I couldn't do it. And so I know there's a lot of other kids that are going through this system that feel totally inadequate. And I know these days kids don't necessarily get beaten, but the expectation to sit at a desk for 8 hours a day and do worksheets or read from a book, is like
stifling.
It's stifling, totally stifling. Because I feel like people are meant to learn from an experiential way. They're meant to learn through doing, to following their innate interests.
Right.
So
we're experiencing now what I've called an evolutionary event. We're evolving into a new understanding of what we're doing here. And understanding what we're doing here includes this amazing intelligence that is living our life and this being that we are. And we might as well believe in that and nourish that as a priority. And by doing that, we open up really the whole being. And that includes the whole brain. That includes the whole nervous system. And from that, we get information. We get intuition, instinct that helps us move forward. And we have to trust that. That's really the big deal. I mean, a lot of religious teachings have been, no, you mustn't listen to your instinct. You've got to obey the law. You've got to obey the 10 Commandments. You've got to obey this or that. And in fact, the inner being is our real guide. And I believe we're evolving into that condition.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Peter. Great conversation as always. And until next time. Stay connected with us and get the book Notes from the West Pole on our website, www.harmonius.com, and that's spelled Harmony Us with a Y. Thanks for listening.